Okay, good evening. We are going to begin tonight with some women warriors in the book of Judges. And I'm going to share my screen and we're going to learn about Devorah and Yael. Okay, so Devorah is a judge. She would sit under her palm tree and judge people, but that was not the only thing she did. Here she is being very sort of Roman. Looks like she's about to lead a battle for the Romans. And there she is about to lead a battle, which we're going to read about. So she's clearly the one doing it. So we're going to read from the book of Judges, chapter 4. Now Devorah, a woman and a prophet, the wife of Lapidot, was judging Israel at that time. She used to sit under Devorah's palm in the hills of Ephraim, and the people of Israel would come to her for judgment. She sent for Barak and said to him, Adonai has given you this order: go march to Mount Tabor and take with you 10,000 men. I will cause Sisera, the commander of Yavin's army, to encounter you at the Kishon River with his chariots and troops, and I will hand him over to you. Now Sisera is the enemy, remember his name. Barak answered her, if you go with me, I'll go, but if you won't go with me, I won't go. She replied, yes, I will gladly go with you, but the way you are doing it will bring you no glory, because Adonai will hand Sisera over to a woman. Then Devorah set out and went with Barak to Kadesh. So Sisera rallied his chariots, all 900 iron chariots, and all the troops he had with him, from Haroshet Hagoyim to the Kishon River. Devorah said to Barak, get going. This is the day when Adonai will hand Sisera over to you. Adonai has gone out ahead of you. So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. And Adonai threw Sisera, all his chariots, and his entire army into a panic before Barak's sword, so that Sisera got down from his chariot and fled on foot. But Barak pursued the chariots and the army. Sisera's entire army was put to the sword, not one man was left. However, Sisera ran on foot to the tent of Yael. Yael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, come in, my lord, stay here with me, and don't be afraid. By the way, Yael is not an Israelite, but she is from a tribe that is an ally of the Israelites. So he went into her tent and she covered him with a blanket. He said to her, please give me a little water to drink. I'm thirsty. She opened a goatskin of milk, gave him some to drink, and covered him up again. He said to her, stand at the entrance to the tent, and if anyone asks you if somebody is here, say no. Okay, I want to stop for a moment and just ask you to tell me what you think is happening in this scene and what the images suggest to you.
Well, Sisera has definitely lost the battle.
True, but he's now escaped into
And
Yael's tent.
Does Yael just pop out of nowhere? Is he going to her deliberately? I'm not familiar with this story.
Well, she's apparently, they don't give us the details. He's running away, and somehow she's in her tent and she comes out. Whether she knows he's coming or not, we don't know. But she says, come on in, you'll be okay with me. And, she's a probably attractive young woman. So he figures, yeah, sure, no problem, I'm coming in. What does she do with him?
Well, she does not give him what he wants. He wants water. He gets oat milk instead.
Carolee, you were going to say something? You have to unmute yourself. Wait a minute, let me unmute you. Okay.
I can't hear her.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, but I know what happens, so you don't.
Don't tell people what happens. But what does this imagery suggest? Blanket, milk,
like mothering. The goat's milk to make him thirsty, right? And salt.
It's going to go further.
But it's a very much of a mothering image, right?
Mothering.
Look, women, what are they for? Stereotypically, You know, they're sexual objects. They're mothers. So she's covering him up with a blanket and giving him milk. Why she gives him milk rather than water, I don't know. But I mean, this imagery kind of suggests that she's a very nurturing, loving woman, right? And he's kind of lulled into a sleep. All right, let's see what happens next. Okay. Every time now I've got to get rid of this floating control. Okay. But when he was deeply asleep, Yael, the wife of Hever, took a tent peg and a hammer in her hand, crept into him quietly, and drove the tent peg into his temple, right through to the ground, so that he died without waking up. So here is Barak pursuing Sisera, and Yael steps out to meet him and says, "Come, I will show you the man you are looking for." He goes into her tent, and there is Sisera lying dead with a tent peg through his temple. Okay, we're going to do a God cast, but I need to do a new share and go to here it is. A little animated version of,
Although the children of Israel had conquered much of the land, the Canaanites oppressed them, and the general Sisera continued to march forward. No one person had taken it upon themselves to defeat Sisera. For who could? Not just any random citizen.
Who are you calling random?
But could a general? Or a prophet?
Barak,
What is it this time?
you must take 10,000 men to the Kishon River, where you will find Sisera and his army. God will deliver him into your hands.
Sisera? Have you seen his army? Iron chariots. What do we have compared to that?
God.
Okay. We'll go. But only if you come with us.
I'll come along, but know this. The victory will not belong to you. People will say that a woman defeated Sisera. Rise! This is the day that God gives Sisera into your hands.
Every last one of the Canaanites was destroyed, except one.
I gotta get out of here.
Exhausted, Sisera arrived at a random citizen's tent, looking for help.
I'm not random. I have a stake in this matter.
Ava, I need help.
My husband's not home. What's wrong?
The battle. The Israelites are decimating us. Tell your husband we need his help. It's time for you to choose sides.
Oh, we've chosen sides.
We're just letting him get away?
He won't get away.
I thought you
I
would.
said a woman would finish him. I didn't say it would be me.
Thanks for letting me hide here.
Shh. Just get some sleep.
I just thank you for the milk. Anyone comes to your tent and asks if there's a man here, you must say there is no one.
And so, because of one random citizen, with the incredible act by the amazing Yael, the land was at peace for 40 years, until the Israelites started sinning again, lost God's favor, got conquered, turned back to God, and started the cycle of judges all over again, in Gideon versus the Midianites.
oh, I gotta turn it off. Wait a second, sorry about that. Okay, was that what you were expecting to have happen?
Why was there a dreidel showing there?
That's their way of showing that they're Israelites. It's or that using it as a spear, a big fat Hanukkah. I mean, that it's just a artistic liberty. But so, I mean, were you expecting that that was going to be the next step?
Well, I have to say, although I didn't say it at the time, that I thought when Yael, especially the way you read it, when Yael took Sisera into her tent, that it was a trap. And
Yeah.
it did have something to do with the prognostication that a woman would be, because
Yeah.
would be the victor, and the victory would be hers, because, you know, there's Sisera, he's ripe for being wiped out, conquered, and there's the woman.
Right. But is this the kind of image of a woman that you expect to have in the Bible? Like, the traditional image is of somebody who's, you know, very subservient. At least that, I mean, certainly that's kind of what Eve was portrayed as by our culture. We found out that she's not so subservient, but, you know, having a couple of women warriors who are pretty tough, I mean, that's kind of not what you usually expect.
Well, this is a very different image. I mean, from everything else. I mean, you suddenly get to this image, and you have women warriors. You have a woman who's going to go ahead and be, you know, the ultimate conqueror in this particular situation of her sister. I mean, that's a very different image than we have before.
And, you know, by the way,
Wonder Woman.
Yeah,
It's like Wonder Woman.
Patty, were you trying to say something? You're muted. You're muted.
It's also an interesting way to kill someone.
Actually, I think I have.
It's not easy to. It would not be necessarily easy to do that.
No.
You know, I have some commentary I think that's coming up, but it's hard for you to see it in the particular translation that I chose. But the way she does it, it's very staccato. You know, he came, he kneeled. It's very much like a rape scene. The rhythm in Hebrew. It's not translated that way here, and you'll see why that's particularly interesting. But yeah, it's a pretty brutal way to kill somebody, and you're not entirely sure what her motivation is. I mean, she does, you know, her husband is an ally of the Israelites. They're not Israelites, but now, of course, the rabbis. Now, notice when Barak is told to go do this, he doesn't want to go unless Devorah goes with him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yet the rabbis think that actually Barak is the one who is the leader here, you know, even though he's clearly not. Or, you know, every time there's a husband in the picture, the rabbis think, well, maybe it was the husband who really did it. Like when I told you about Huldah last week, who's the one who verified the authenticity of Deuteronomy. The rabbis think that really it was her husband who did it, not her. Because, like, how could a woman do that? Okay, I'm going to share with you some Debbie Friedman, who wrote, did you guys know the song about Devorah? Some of you? So what I'm going to try to do is play it in the, wait, before I share it, I'm going to play it in the background and then I'll show the words. So, let's see, Devorah, here it is. Okay, we're going to have Debbie Friedman actually singing it and we'll share the words.
Well, either Devorah or Water of the Well, no. Those are.
Oh.
love songs.
Can you hear that?
You know, I was thinking.
You can hear that, okay. She hasn't started yet, all
You
right.
hear this and you think about the Haftarah. It's so lame.
Right, so lame.
Given the text. I got some work to do.
Right? Well, then my work here is done.
Well, you know, it would be like a
Blah, blah. Why doesn't she get started?
It's an request, huh?
Again, the chorus is arise, arise, Devorah, arise, arise, and sing your song. Arise, arise, Devorah, uri, uri, dabri, shir. Arise, arise, Devorah, arise, arise, and sing your song. Arise, arise, Devorah, uri, uri, dabri, shir. Devorah the prophet was a judge in Israel. She sat beneath her palm tree on a hill, and people came from everywhere just to hear her judgments, honest and fair. Devorah the prophet, Devorah, a mother in Israel. Arise, arise, Devorah, arise, arise, and sing the song. Arise, arise, Devorah, uri, uri, dabri, shir. Devorah the prophet was courageous, strong, and wise. Her people lived in peace for 40 years. The 12 tribes lived together as one for the first time since the world had begun. Devorah the prophet, Devorah, a mother in Israel. Arise, arise, Devorah, arise, arise, and sing your song. Arise, arise, Devorah, uri, uri, dabri, shir. Arise, Devorah, arise and sing a song. Arise, Devorah, uri, uri, dabri, shir. Uri, uri, dabri, shir.
So that's a really wonderful song. I love it. Okay, so we're going to look at some more.
When I was visiting one of the cities in which I did a concert, they had just
Oh.
done the Jewish community center.
Okay, she's still talking. All right.
rendition of
Thank you very much, Debbie Friedman. Let's see. So, can you see this? Yeah. So, I could people unmute themselves because I hear some echoing. Thanks. So, as I said, the story of Devorah appears in chapter 4 and 5 of the book of Judges, which covers the period of Israel's tribal confederacy prior to the monarchy. The tribes, though unified by a common faith and a need for self-defense, are not yet unified politically. Public institutions and structures have not yet been constituted, accounting for more egalitarian relationships between the sexes. That, you notice also in the beginning of Exodus that you have women with important roles, and then they disappear once the revolution is launched. So, Carol Myers, who wrote Discovering Eve, we talked about her when we were discussing Eve, says that the absence in early Israel of developed hierarchies in political and economic spheres created an atmosphere that would have allowed for non-hierarchical gender relationships. cross-cultural analogies suggest that both males and females worked very hard and contributed nearly equally to the demands of establishing arable plots of land and eking out a living from them in the rocky, seasonably arid hillsides of the Palestinian highlands. She explains that it's quite plausible for a woman to be involved in military affairs at that time. Localized and sporadic defense problems existed during this period, but they were met by a non-centralized ad hoc militia system. Without the formalized structure of a standing army, women could and did contribute to the defense effort. Female participation in the military realm is in fact a typical feature of pioneer societies, which is interesting when you think about the fact that you have people very opposed to women being involved in the military in our, we're just watching Mrs. America. I don't know if anybody has watched that. It's about Phyllis Schlafly versus, the feminists of that day. And Phyllis Schlafly, and her group arguing against the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, because she says that women shouldn't be in combat. And usually people in that kind of circle are also pretty religious, fundamentalist, Christians who go according to what the Bible says. Well, here's the Bible showing women being, warriors, and that, according to Carol Myers, anthropologically is not a weird thing, because there was a kind of equilibrium between the roles of men and women, because the home and the workplace were all merged into one, and women did a lot of hard work as well as the men, and so there wasn't this incredible division between what men and women did. Okay. Okay. So Miki Ball, who's another feminist writer, sees that in Devorah's designations, she's a poet. We didn't read the whole story, but she's a poet, a prophet, a judge, and a warrior. And that makes her an outstanding ruler, according to Miki Ball. Deborah is the sort of English version of Devorah. The ideal judge, leader, and animator of the people is not referred to as a gibur, mighty and strong. It's obvious that the concept of gibur is exclusively male. It requires no wisdom, but only violence, no insight, only bodily strength, no poetry, only cutting words. And that's kind of, I would say, tough way to look at the difference between men and women. But yeah, the male judges are referred to as gibur, and not her, because she does combine all these other aspects. I mean, the other judges also are judges in addition to warriors, but they aren't necessarily poets and philosophers and everything else that she is. I can't believe that every time I have to get rid of this thing. Okay. So according to the rabbis, she was an upright judge with the same prophetic ability as Samuel, so that's good. Torah scholars would come to learn from her. Torah scholars, of course, didn't exist at the time of the judges, but that's how the rabbis retroject that into the story. And this ability was granted her as a reward for her good deeds, namely the preparation of wicks for the tabernacle. Okay, so now they're sort of saying she's an upright judge, she's wonderful, but really what she did was she prepared wicks for the tabernacle. And she encouraged her fellow Israelites to regularly attend synagogue and the tabernacle. And the Midrash will say that she sits outdoors under a palm to teach Torah in public, because a woman would not normally be alone with men within her house. So, of course, she had to teach outside of the home. And she represents the word of the Lord and judges the people. But the military deliverance, according to the rabbis, is effected by means of Barak, the military commander. And, sorry about that. So, one tradition presents Barak as Devorah's husband, who is also called Lapidot. So in other words, as far as military might, they are rewriting the history and understanding it very differently. Okay, I'm going to come back to... So, it's very clear that the women here are the ones who are affecting the military victory. But according to the rabbis, it was either Barak as the general or Barak as her husband. Even though it says her husband's name is Lapidot, they say, well, it's actually the same person. Because how could she, on her own, be a military general, right? And that's how they rewrite it, which is just not at all what the story says. Any comments about that?
I think it's very typical.
Ezra, are you trying to unmute yourself? Yeah.
I was going to say, is it fair to say that you don't see women, that you can see them as leaders and as inspiration to the army, but you don't see them in hand-to-hand combat?
Right.
She drives a spike through Sisera's head, but he happens to be sleeping at the time.
Right. But in terms of military commander, I mean, Devorah is the one who leads the army out to, face Sisera's army, right? And Barak, who's the general, it says it in the text, I'm not going to go unless you go. He's kind of scared of this other army because they're very well equipped. And he's basically saying, well, I'm not sure I want to do this, but if you come with me, I'll do it. Then the rabbis turn it around and say she teaches Torah, she does the wicks in the tabernacle, she's kind of an inspiration to other people, but it's not as though she's actually...
Well, she certainly puts her life on the line when she goes to lead the troops. Because if they had been run off the field of battle, she probably would have been one of the casualties too.
Well, she might have been, but that's not what a general does. A general, I think, kind of plans the military strategy, but doesn't actually go out and, do the direct killing, right? It keeps them kind of protected from that.
Usually the generals started that. I mean, David starts by killing Goliath.
Well, we don't know how she started. It doesn't tell us, actually. So we don't really know. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's missing in the Torah, well, this is not in the Torah, this is in the Nevi'im and the prophets, but there's a lot of information missing in all these stories, and so that's one of the reasons that the Midrash can be so rich, because the rabbis can fill in the blanks, or we can fill in the blanks. We can say, hey, Devorah spent years, she was like Mulan, planning for this, right? Or maybe she did, maybe she was just the mind and not the muscle. Who knows? But that's why we can make all kinds of things up and make it confirm to our own, ideas about what this is. So we're going to go with...
It just seems to me that it's a little convenient that all of a sudden the story is shifting from where the story is to, well, it's not the woman. It's really not her.
Well, as I said, they did the same thing with Huldah. I mean, right. You look at Josiah's story, which is later on, they bring it to Huldah. She says it's authentic. And then the rabbis say, no, it was her husband. So they're just a little misogynistic. I don't know. All right, so here is Yael offering milk to Sisera, looking very sweet. Nice big bowl of milk, probably warmed up for him. Here she is driving the tent peg into his head. And another angle on driving the tent peg as he lounges around.
That's the only weapon that she had.
That's very possible.
In the story that you showed us, the little cartoon, she was pounding the tent pegs at the very beginning.
That's a good point.
And to smother somebody bigger than you are must be very, I would assume, very difficult. So the only way she could have killed him was the implements that she had, a tent peg and a hammer.
Good point. That's a good point. That is probably all she had. I mean, she didn't have a sword or a big manukia that she could ram through his body. Or a big dreidel that she could have smashed his head with. Okay, so we're going to read some more of her story. So this is Devorah's song that is actually in the Bible, not the one that Debbie Friedman came up with. So it's a poem, basically. It's a very, very old poem. Yael will be blessed more than all women. The wife of Hever the Canaanite, that was her husband, Hever, will be blessed more than any woman in the tent. He asked for water, and she gave him milk. In an elegant bowl, she brought him curds. This is the part where it sounds like, in Hebrew, that it's like a rape. Then she took a tent peg in her left hand and a workman's hammer in her right. With the hammer, she struck Sisera, pierced his skull. Yes, she shattered and crushed his temple. He sank down at her feet. He fell and lay there. He sank at her feet. He fell. Where he sank down, there he fell dead. So that's the part that's in the poem in her song that really makes it, especially in the Hebrew, sound like very staccato, one thing after the other, kind of the way the tent peg was going into his skull. Now, this is interesting. Sisera's mother looks out the window, peering out through the lattice. She wonders. She's waiting for him to come home. Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why are his horses so slow to return? The wisest of her ladies answer her, and she repeats it to herself. Of course, they're collecting and dividing the spoil. A girl, 2 girls for every warrior. For Sisera, booty of dyed clothing, a plunder of colorfully embroidered garments, 2 embroidered scars for every soldier's neck. So, here are the questions we need to look at. How does the story of Yael reverse your expectations of women in their role in society, especially during a time of war? And how do the prose version and the poetic version compare in their perspective on Yael? So, we talked a little bit about the reversal of expectations, especially at a time of war, but here's a question. What is it that Sisera's mother is expecting Sisera to be out doing right now? What do warriors do?
Enjoying the booties of war.
And what are the booties of war? What are the booties?
And he should be enjoying those.
Wait.
Slave girls, women.
So there's
women in clothing, women in goods.
Yeah, exactly. Women in goods. And the women are probably going to be, how do you think they're going to be treated? What do you think?
They're booty in war. They're not going to be treated very well at all. I mean,
yeah, they're going to be raped. That's what happens in these wars. So the mother is looking out, wondering where he is, and one of her handmaids says, he's probably enjoying his booty. Okay? Now, the fact that Yael and the description of how she's doing the tent peg, which really, according to Robert Alter, sounds like rape, is Yael doing to Sisera what he would have done to all the women that he would have conquered. It's kind of subtle, although it's not that subtle to have the mother saying that stuff and knowing that the opposite happened. You know, he's not exactly booty, but he's not exactly a conquering hero at this point. But that's what the expectation was of these people when they went to war. Okay, I'm going to share again. I must say that every time I have to get rid of this floating control thing is very, oops. Okay, so we talked a little bit about Yael as sort of a symbol of motherhood because of the milk and the blanket. And then Mikabel refers to it as an instance of anti-mothering. And it's especially significant in the poem because it increases the sexual connotations of the murderous act. The poem subtly suggests that Yael's action is a kind of rape. You may not agree, but it could sound kind of like violence, like a violent sexual act. Bang, 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 right? And Robert Alter calls the murder an aggressively phallic assassination. Yael pounds a tent peg into Sisera's head, a violent, penetrating action which is repeated 3 times. Sisera's fall is also repeated 3 times in staccato rhythm. Further, as Susan Niditch points out, the words used to convey Sisera's death suggest sexual submission, Sisera falls between Yael's legs. Legs or feet are used in scripture as euphemisms for male or female organs. So there are a lot of subtle clues here to suggest that this is, in fact, a rape. And Nidus analyzes the verbs that describe his fall. He bent, kara, he lay, shachav, bereft of life, ruined or despoiled, shadud. She says, for example, the vast majority of biblical uses of shakav in a sexual context refer to illegitimate relations in rape, incest, ritual impurity, adultery, and so forth. So using those verbs, we may look at them and it doesn't necessarily strike us as significant, but in terms of intratextual context, those are verbs that are used specifically to suggest these kind of violent acts or something that's unnatural or wrong. And Nidus concludes that double meanings of sexuality and death emerge in every line. He is at her feet in a pose of defeat and humiliation. He kneels between her legs in sexual pose. Yael herself is the aggressor, the despoiler. And then we talked about what happens when the mother is looking out the window wondering what happened to her son. Dana Fuel and David Gunn say that women on the losing side can expect to be captured and raped if not killed, hence the poetic justice with which the Israelite singers depict Sisera's death. Thus Yael, as depicted by Devorah, does to Sisera what he would have done to these women, i.e. rape. Oh. So, do you see the rape of Sisera as a payback of sorts for what women are generally subjected to in wartime? Do you think the ends justify the means? Is it acceptable for Yael to offer Sisera false shelter before killing him, even though he's the enemy? Now that women are able to participate in combat, would you feel comfortable with U.S. women soldiers behaving like Yael? So let's take a second to talk about that.
Question?
Judy.
I certainly don't know, but I wonder, what about when the Israelites took captives in battle? What was their behavior?
Well, theoretically, it says in, I believe it's in Deuteronomy, that if you take a woman captive and you decide you want her as your wife, you need to give her 30 days to mourn what she's lost, which is her husband and her family and everything else, and then you can marry her. So, at least in theory, it's a more civilized way of doing things.
That's
I'm not
really
saying that that's how it happened. Because, you know, in a number of situations, well, in Deuteronomy, you also have, you know, you're going to conquer the land and kill everybody, including women and children.
Yeah.
And also, you have King Saul, who is supposed to destroy everybody and everything, and he doesn't, and so therefore he loses the kingdom. And the one he leaves alive is Agag, and so Samuel has to kill him, the king.
That's
So,
really interesting. Because, I mean, taking women as captives and raping them is so common in ancient warfare. I mean, the Greeks did it, you know,
That's probably why there is a law saying don't do it that way.
I think that's really interesting. Yeah.
It probably happened, and that's why there's a law.
If a man had done this to a woman, had, like, you know, kind of seduced her to come into the tent for, like, cool water or shelter or whatever, and did the same thing back, it would be infuriating. So why isn't it if a woman did it to a man? It's
Well, that's the question. I mean, is it okay to, I mean, he is the enemy. He will kill, you know, his army was going to kill Israelites. So is it okay to kind of trick him and bring him into the tent? I mean, this is a big moral question that, you know, is not just about Yael.
I don't know. I think if it's wrong for a man to do it to a woman, why is it? It's wrong for a person to do this to a person.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand why they did it, but if it's, you know, like it was described, it's just.
Well,
was Yael?
Yeah.
I mean, she used, you know, like her power of being a woman the best way she could.
Right. Exactly. She did.
I mean,
was Yael aware of how important Sisera was?
I would think so, but again, there's so little information. It's, there are a lot of, big holes in the story.
I think she would know he wasn't an Israelite.
Yeah,
Would she have
definitely.
known that the battle had been won?
Let me.
I think he knew.
I'm going to double check and see.
Also, the end of the question, the end of that, the last question was, what would happen in today's society?
Right.
In today's society, she would have had to capture him because what she did would be considered murder.
And a war crime, right?
Wartime, yes.
Yeah.
You don't kill the enemy people if they're already subdued. You can kill them if they're fighting.
You know what? The story does not have any background on Yael. It just says she came out of her tent. She's the wife of this guy, Heber, and it doesn't give us background. I like when I talk to kids about doing a Devorah Torah for their bar mitzvah. I'll tell them the story about like Cinderella, for example, and I'll say, okay, why? How did the mother die? What was the father doing while the stepmother was mistreating Cinderella? Why did he put up with that? I mean, there are a lot of questions you could ask about that story, which is a story that they know, right? And it's the same thing with these stories. There's so much missing. So we don't know. I mean, we'll assume that Yael knew that he was an enemy. But yeah, you're right. I think if this was today, it would be a war crime, as opposed to just capturing him. Now, if she had captured him and, let's say, tied his hands and handed him over to Barak, he would have killed him.
Absolutely.
But probably not in that way. But, maybe he was sound asleep and he didn't feel any pain. I doubt it. But anyway, the milk helped him go to sleep.
Well, driving something into the skull is a really ancient form of surgery, not...
Oh, really?
Yeah, trepanning. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it ain't really... It was done thousands and thousands of years ago to deal with evil spirits or...
And they got rid of evil spirits that way? They probably got rid of the person at the same time.
Well, probably, yes. Apparently the archaeological finds, I'm just looking at something in which I saw this.
The Neanderthals.
Looks like people survived, but only for a few weeks. I mean, in other words, the skulls showed. Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't think that it would be a very successful surgery.
Nevertheless, it was done all the way through and into the Renaissance.
So maybe Yael was a surgeon, who knows, like who she was. And so that's how she knew.
Different tool, though, I mean.
She must have had enormous strength in her arms, though, to drive a stake through a head. How do you do that in one blow?
3 blows, remember?
Oh, 3 blows. But the first one would have had to have
woken him up,
immobilized him.
Yeah.
So, I mean, she must be incredibly strong. I mean, maybe
one thing's for certain, that tent's not going to fall over.
Wait, Ezra?
I say one thing is certain, that tent is not going to fall over.
She had to be pretty strong to be able to put the tent peg in.
Yeah.
And the tent, when she was putting up the tent.
Well, maybe her husband put up the tent for her, but... Yeah.
Well, that could be.
Okay, so I want to then go to another story that's somewhat similar, and it's in what's called the Apocrypha. So the Apocrypha is, it's different stories and the names of different people, right? And the Apocrypha only exists in the Catholic Bible. So our Bible, the Hebrew Bible, has Torah, prophets, and writings. The Protestant Bible has that plus the New Testament, and the Catholic Bible has something called the Apocrypha, which are a whole set of other stories that didn't make it into our Bible. However, the Catholic Bible is to a great extent based on the Septuagint, which is the translation, the Greek translation of the Bible. And so these books were probably part of that at some point, but they got tossed out. And I guess maybe the rabbis didn't want too many strong women, because we'll see what happens with... This is Judith. I don't know if anybody knows the story of Judith. Okay, let's... Okay. Do you see this thing that says press escape to show floating meeting controls?
No.
Oh, good. Okay, I only see it. All right. Here's Judith. She's doing something similar, as you might see. All right, in the opening chapters, this is more of a summary. God's divine sovereignty over Israel comes into direct conflict with Nebuchadnezzar's political sovereignty over all the nations of the Western world. He's a Persian. Holofernes, commander-in-chief of... Oh, I'm sorry, he's an Assyrian. Okay, commander-in-chief of the Assyrian armies of Nebuchadnezzar, which of course is impossible historically. Okay, so I was right, yeah. Okay, Nebuchadnezzar is a Persian, or a Babylonian, and Holofernes is an Assyrian, so they mixed everything up here. Okay. He leads a massive force in a putative campaign against the Western vassal nations, including Israel. The people of Israel block his retaliatory advancement against all the nations of the West at their little town of Bethulia. Holofernes lays siege to Bethulia, cutting off its water supply. After 34 days, the exhausted Bethulians are ready to surrender, even though it will mean worship of Nebuchadnezzar. At that time, Judith heard about these things. Judith had lived at home as a widow for 3 years and 4 months. She wore the garments of her widowhood. She fasted all the days of her widowhood. She was beautiful in appearance and had a very lovely face. And her husband, Manasseh, had left her gold and silver and men and women slaves and cattle and fields. And she maintained this estate. No one spoke ill of her, for she feared God with great devotion. When Judith heard that Uzziah promised under oath to surrender the city to the Assyrians, she sent her maid to the elders of the city. They came to her, and she said to them, "Listen to me, rulers of the people of Bethulia. What you have said to the people today is not right. You have even sworn and pronounced this oath between God and you, promising to surrender the city to our enemies unless the Lord turns and helps us within so many days." Judith said to them, "Listen to me. I am about to do a thing which will go down through all generations of our descendants. Stand at the city gate tonight, and I will go out with my maid, and within the days after which you have promised to surrender the city to our enemies, the Lord will deliver Israel by my hand. Only do not try to find out what I plan, for I will not tell you until I have finished what I am about to do." And she removed the sackcloth which she had been wearing, and took off her widow's garments, and bathed her body with water, and anointed herself with precious ointment, and combed her hair, and put on a tiara, and arrayed herself in her gayest apparel, which she used to wear while her husband Manasseh was living. And I just want to stop for one moment, because there are other stories like this in the Bible. Can you think of any where a woman dresses, anoints herself, gets ready to seduce a man?
Abigail.
I'm sorry?
Abigail.
Abigail. Okay, well, Abigail, actually, when she first meets David, is not yet a widow. She becomes one, very conveniently. But there are a couple other women who do this.
Sort of like Esther.
Oh,
Ruth. Remember, Ruth's mother-in-law sends her to see Boaz and gets her to be all anointed and kind of dressed up almost like on a wedding night to seduce him. And then there's also, we don't get all these details, but when Judah, who is one of Jacob's sons, he's a widow, and he goes, and his daughter-in-law is a widow as well, but she puts on her finery and pretends that she's a prostitute so that he'll sleep with her and she'll have a child. So this is kind of a trope that happens in other places as well. Okay, so she's all prettied up and smells good and all of that. And she put sandals on her feet and put on her anklets and bracelets and rings and her earrings and all her ornaments, and made herself very beautiful to entice the eyes of all men who might see her. And by the way, we remember that she's very well respected and wealthy and all of that, so no one's going to suspect her of doing anything untoward. And she gave her maid a bottle of wine and a flask of oil, and filled a bag with parched grain and a cake of dried fruit and fine bread. And she wrapped up all her vessels and gave them to her to carry. There was great excitement in the whole camp, for her arrival was reported from tent to tent. And they came and stood around her. She waited outside the tent of Holofernes while they told him about her. And they marveled at her beauty and admired the Israelites, judging them by her. And everyone said to his neighbor, "Who could despise these people who have women like this among them?" Surely not a man of them had better be left alive, for if we let them go, they will be able to ensnare the whole world. Then Holofernes' companions and all his servants came out and led her into the tent. Holofernes was resting on his bed under a canopy which was woven with purple and gold and emeralds and precious stones. When they told him of her, he came forward to the front of the tent with silver lamps carried before him. And when Judith came into the presence of Holofernes and his servants, they all marveled at the beauty of her face. And she prostrated herself and made obeisance to him, and his slaves raised her up. And by the way, now he's already gotten all the food and the drink, right? So now he sees her, and he's probably had a couple of glasses of wine by now. Then Judith came in and lay down, and Holofernes' heart was ravished with her, and he was moved with great desire to possess her, for he had been waiting for an opportunity to deceive her ever since the day he first saw her. So Holofernes said to her, "Drink now and be merry with us." Judith said, "I will drink now, my lord, because my life means more to me today than in all the days since I was born." Then she took and ate and drank before him what her maid had prepared. And Holofernes was greatly pleased with her and drank a great quantity of wine, much more than he had ever drunk in any one day since he was born. So Judith was left alone in the tent, with Holofernes stretched out on his bed, for he was overcome with wine. Now Judith had told her maid to stand outside the bedchamber and to wait for her to come out, as she did every day, for she said she would be going out for her prayers. So everyone went out, and no one, either small or great, was left in the bedchamber. Then Judith, standing beside his bed, said in her heart, "O Lord God of all might, look in this hour upon the work of my hands, for the exaltation of Jerusalem. For now is the time to help thy inheritance, and to carry out my undertaking for the destruction of the enemies who have risen up against us." She went up to the post at the end of the bed above Holofernes' head and took down his sword that hung there. She came close to his bed and took hold of the hair of his head and said, "Give me strength this day, O Lord God of Israel." And she struck his neck twice with all her might and severed it from his body, which, by the way, you're speaking of strength, that is not easy either. In fact, unfortunately, someone told me about all those beheadings that happened during the, what's that group? You know, huh?
Tudors?
Not the Tudors.
The
I was,
Tudors?
I was thinking about recently.
Taliban.
ISIS.
Taliban.
ISIS, yeah. That when they showed tapes of people's head being cut off, and you don't just slice it off. I won't go into more detail than that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so she strikes his neck twice with all her might and severed it from his body. Then she tumbled his body off the bed and pulled down the canopy from the post. Another very strong woman. After a moment, she went out and gave Holofernes' head to her maid, who placed it in her food bag. Then the two of them went out together as they were accustomed to go for prayer, and they passed through the camp. Okay, so let's look at what some people have to say about Judith. So she's conventional in upholding inheritance and purity rites and prayer and fasting and her ideas about God's providence. But she's unconventional in upbraiding the male leaders of her town. Like she's saying to them, "What are you doing, you pipsqueaks? Why are you giving in?" You know, but she says it very nicely, although she orders them. Because they don't even believe that God's going to, save them. No other woman in the Bible has another woman in charge of her estate. No other childless woman refuses to marry, because she's been widowed for a long time. On her account, no one ever spread terror among the Israelites during the lifetime of Judith or for a long time after her death. Okay, end of slideshow. So that is a very similar story to the one that we have about Yael and Devorah. And maybe the rabbis felt like 2 women who were warriors was enough. We can't add yet one more. I don't know why they didn't include it. It may have been written later. There's a lot of stuff. They didn't include the Maccabees either, by the way. So, any thoughts about this? Because if you don't, I'm going to go on to another lady. Carolee, do you have something you want to say? No, you're muted.
I had never heard that story before. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, these are pretty tough ladies.
It's a famous subject of Renaissance art. Judith with the head of Holofernes. You know?
Yeah, I like the way the maid puts it in the bag.
Oh.
But really, I'm telling you, cutting off a head with a sword is, you don't just go like that, okay? So, but same thing, the tent peg. I mean, you know, it's kind of unrealistic, but it's a story, right? So what I want to share with you now is a story about another woman, which isn't so, yeah, please.
Well, I was going to say that the image that you showed of Judith cutting, which is by Artemisia Gentileschi, who's a female artist, right? She herself was raped, and actually this is one of the weirdest moments in the history, because we have the court trial. She actually takes her accuser in the 1600s to trial. So there's the record of her sort of rape, and she does this painting. So it's just really fantastic to think through what she thought of this particular story in the Bible, and then she depicted. It's one of the most impressive artworks by a woman of this early. And it took a long time to figure out she had done it and not her dad and all the stuff. But I just, sorry, you showed that, I was like, oh, her backstory, even as an artist.
So did she win her case in court?
Her accuser was found guilty of rape, but the solution, I know, it's a total amazing story.
Yeah.
The solution was that she had to marry someone else. Like, the conclusion was that she just needed to get herself married.
And then she'd stay out of trouble, right?
Right.
Actually,
that's how she proved the rape was proven, because of course she was carrying a child, and there were witnesses. I mean, it's an amazing story, and the trial exists, which is like surreal that she decided to do this. But
wow,
that is amazing.
Thank you for sharing that. That's great. So this is another story in the book of Judges. This is Jephtah's daughter, and it's kind of sad, but then there's a little redemption at the end. So. Okay.
Oh, Jephtah's daughter.
Yeah.
Oh.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Okay. So, oh, yeah, we're gonna do a little opera here for a second. These are the words, but I need to run the opera before I do that. Let me find it. Oh, here it is. Okay. Listen to that. Okay, that was just a little touch of an opera about this story, but I know this is a friend of yours, Judy, I think, Alicia Ostraker. So here's her lament for Jephtah's daughter. We sacrifice this girl in the theater of war, for the Lord your God is a jealous God. We sacrifice this girl in order to spell our names. See now that I, even I, am he. We sacrifice this girl to strengthen our hearts, to combat the enemy that surrounds us. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. We sacrifice this girl today because we sacrificed her yesterday. Last year, 1,000 years ago. It is a tradition of holiness, for the Lord our God is holy. We sacrifice this girl because her hair is long and powerful. Sin began with a woman, and because of her we all die. We sacrifice this girl because she danced at the wrong moment. Her filthiness was in her skirts. We sacrifice this girl that blood surged from her cut throat. We sacrifice this girl that her soft new body become ash and cinders, and we smash what remains of her pelvis, and let her put away her harlotries from her face and her adulteries from between her breasts. We sacrifice this girl to protect ourselves from impurity. For the lips of a strange woman drop honey, and her mouth is smoother than oil. We sacrifice this girl because she asked for it, for all his ways are justice. All right, so now you're going to see, wait, what happened to my, wait a second. I'm sorry. This is not what should be here right now. Okay. Where did she go? No, this is not the... I will get to that in a second. Where is she? Here she is. Okay. It didn't start where it was supposed to start, even though I had it all ready. Okay, so this is... Why is this? Okay, that's what I need.
Yeah.
Okay, Jephtah's daughter. This is also in Judges, as I mentioned. So, Jephtah is another leader, another judge, who also is not your typical run-of-the-mill judge. He is born illegitimately, so he's a bastard. And that's not what normally happens when you have somebody leading the community. So, and he's been driven out by his half-brothers and moves to Tob, east of Gilead. He's surrounded by worthless men. You know, he's hanging out with the wrong crowd. And then the elders of Gilead ask him to be their leader in their campaign against the Ammonites, who are, Ammonites are definitely enemies of Israel. They agree that he will be their permanent chief if Jephtah succeeds in defeating Ammon. Relying on the might of God, Jephtah challenges the Ammonites. Now, then it says, then the spirit of Adonai came up upon Jephtah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh on through Mitzpeh of Gilead, and from there over to the people of Ammon. Jephtah made a vow to Adonai. Now this is always very dangerous when these people make vows. If you will hand the people of Ammon over to me, then whatever comes out the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the people of Ammon will belong to Adonai. I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. So Jephtah crossed over to fight the people of Ammon, and Adonai handed them over to him. He killed them from Aroer until you reach Minit, 20 cities, all the way to Avel Keramim. It was a massacre. So the people of Ammon were defeated before the people of Israel. Now, what do you think is going to come out of his house?
His daughter.
As Jephtah was returning to his house in Mizpah, his daughter came dancing out to meet him with tambourines. She was his only child. He had no other son or daughter. When he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, "Oh no, my daughter, you're breaking my heart. Why must you be the cause of such pain to me? I made a vow to Adonai, and I can't go back on my word." By the way, once again, blaming someone else. Who's the one who made the vow? Now he's saying it's your fault. She said to him, "Father, you made a vow to Adonai, so do whatever you said you would to me, because Adonai did take vengeance on your enemies, the people of Ammon." Then she said to her father, "Just do this one thing for me. Let me be alone for 2 months. I'll go away into the mountains with my friends and mourn, because I will die without getting married." "You may go," he answered, and he sent her away for 2 months. She left, she and her friends, and mourned in the mountains that she would die unmarried. After 2 months, she returned to her father, and he did with her what he had vowed. She had remained a virgin, so it became a law in Israel that the women of Israel would go every year for 4 days to lament the daughter of Jephtah from Gilead. Okay, there's a very sad story, and the poem was supposed to come after the story, but we heard it before. So the idea is, we sacrifice a poor young woman for all sorts of causes that we feel are more important. This certainly has a resonance with Greek tragedy, right? Where virgins were sacrificed by their fathers in order to get a good win to go defeat Troy or whatever other things they needed. Which is supposedly why the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, is in the Bible, so that we can say we don't believe in sacrificing our children, but here we go, doing it anyway. So, any thoughts about this story? Who in the end ends up being the agent in the story? Is kind of the person with the kind of control over the story.
She has a little bit of control because she gets him to give her a 2-month reprieve. Other people, because I know this story, other people have said that he do this, that he let her stay in the mountains forever.
Oh, that's a nice way to...
That was one thing I heard.
Yeah.
So she has a little control.
Right, she has a little agency at the end because she's able to go away and to really create something that becomes a ritual forever.
Well, yes.
Nonetheless, it's pretty horrible. Now,
yes.
Do you think Jephtah should have been a little more prescient about this?
It would be interesting to know who he really thought was going to come out and meet him when he came back.
Yeah.
If he was upset that she came out, then who else was in the house that could have possibly come out? I mean, a servant.
It wasn't a who. It was one of the goats or one of the animals.
Oh.
That's what he maybe thought. However, let's look at some commentary on this. Okay, we thought about this. Okay, we did the oratorio in the wrong order. Okay, whatever. Now, before we go to see him, let's look at a couple of other stories. So, this is a story that we will look at in more detail at some point. But right now, I mean, you know the story, right? We read it last week. So Abraham is told to go up to the mountain and to sacrifice his son. But what happens? God says, don't do it. Interestingly, Isaac happens to be a boy. Now, Abraham is totally faithful in God. He's not making a bargain with God. But God nonetheless comes to his rescue. Now let's look at another story. In Samuel, Israel's soldiers had been driven to exhaustion that day, but Saul issued this warning to the people. A curse on any man who eats any food until evening when I have finished taking vengeance on my enemies. Saul's out doing battle and, he's saying no one's allowed to eat, right? So none of the people even tasted food. Now the people came to a forest where there was a honeycomb on the ground. When the people had entered the forest, they saw there the honeycomb with honey dripping out. But no one put his hand to his mouth because the people feared the oath. But Jonathan, who was Saul's son, hadn't heard his father charging the people with the oath. So he put out the end of the staff in his hand, dipped it in the honeycomb, and raised it to his mouth. Whereupon his eyes lit up. But one of the people said in response, "Your father strictly charged the people with an oath, a curse on any man who eats any food today, even though the people are fainting with hunger." Then Saul said to Jonathan, "Tell me what you did." And Jonathan told him, "Yes, I tasted a little honey with the end of the staff in my hand. Here I am, I'm ready to die." Saul said, may God do the same to me. Can someone mute whoever has, there's somebody who's not muted. Thank you. Saul said, may God do the same to me and more also if you are not put to death, Jonathan? But the people said to Saul, must Jonathan die who has accomplished this great deliverance in Israel? Heaven forbid. As Adonai lives, not one hair of his head will fall to the ground, because he worked with God today. In this way, the people rescued Jonathan so that he didn't die. Interesting. 2 boys rescued, one by God, one by the people. So here's Phyllis Tribble's idea about this. Jephtah mourns for himself, right? He says, look what you've done to me. He offers neither solace nor release, nor does he wish to die instead of his child, as did the father David. That's when David's son dies. So, it's like, oh, look what you've done to me. You've made me miserable. When he does eventually sacrifice his daughter, he expresses no emotion. Tribble contrasts the mechanical way in which Jephtah performs a sacrifice with the pain implied in Abraham's act. Quickly, without passing judgment, the narrator tells the deed. He did to her his vow which he had vowed. How different is this story from Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac, where detail heaped upon detail slows down the narrative to build suspense for the climactic moment. I'm not sure I completely agree with this. I don't see a lot of emotion on Abraham's part, but that's her opinion. Then the rabbis actually severely criticized Jephtah's vow and his conduct that resulted in the senseless death of his daughter. Jephtah is portrayed as a haughty individual who flaunts his position as commander of all the military chieftains, when in actuality he was an ignoramus, unlettered in the Torah. They compare him to a sycamore shoot that is easily broken. And she is presented by the rabbis as wise and practical. By the way, she has no name. That's always significant too. So she's trying to find a way to deal with this vow. She tells her father that the Torah commands man to bring offerings of cattle from the herd or from the flock rather than human sacrifices. This is in the Midrash. This is not in the actual Bible. That she's going to try to find a way to get around this vow, like by offering animals instead. Her father replies that his vow is couched in general wording, whatever comes out of the house of the door of my house. She responds that the patriarch Jacob also made a general vow, and of all that you give me, I will set aside a tithe for you. But he did not sacrifice a single one of his 12 sons. In other words, a tithe might be 1.5 children. This argument also fails to convince Jephtah. The daughter is therefore presented in contrast to her father as conversant in the laws of the Torah and the stories of the Bible. Again, that's Midrash, not in the Bible. When Jephtah could find no reason to annul his vow, he slaughtered his daughter before the Holy One, blessed be he, an act that the Lord found loathsome. A heavenly voice cried out at this injustice and exclaimed, did I ask that lives be offered before me? As it is said in Jeremiah, which I never commanded, never decreed, and which never came to my mind. Of course, why didn't God say that when he was about to kill the kid? So, who is to blame? Jephtah, the community, or, the daughter is missing an E. Okay, the role of the community. We wonder why no one, not even God, intervenes in the narrative of Abraham's near sacrifice of his son Isaac. God sends an angel to prevent the killing in Isaac's case. Why do the people of the community not countermand the vow's fulfillment? Why do the women friends of the daughter not convince her to run away and escape her doom? And where is the daughter's mother? Why is she not even mentioned in this story, much less presented as an advocate of her daughter? And then here is the idea that she has some agency. Does Jephtah not know that it was customary in Israel for women to come out and greet with song and dance victorious male warriors upon their return from battle? And that it is quite likely that his daughter would also follow this custom? So here's the idea that he should have known that he's coming back from battle as a victor, and that what women did in those days is they'd come out and greet the victors and dance and make, merry with their timbrels. Or does he think that an animal will be first out of his house? And of course, animals were often stabled in a small room inside and quite near the entrance of the typical Israelite house. and they were obviously a common object of sacrifice. He could have said, whatever animal comes out of my house, but he said, whatever comes out of my house. And Jephtah's vow was made in their hometown of Mizpah. If he pronounced it publicly, presumably she would have heard it. Maybe that was Jephtah's intention, that she hear it and so take warning not to come out of the house first. But even if the vow was spoken in private, it is still conceivable that word could have gotten back to the daughter. And yet, if the daughter did know, one wonders why she went out to greet him. Dana Fuel, who commented on previous stories, suggests that Jephtah's daughter suddenly condemns her father for his rash vow. She says that the daughter may have known of her father's bargain. Indeed, though her father makes only oblique reference to his vow when she greets him, she instantly grasps his meaning. Thus, the daughter is not blindly obedient to her father. Rather, she actually comes forth out of the house quite intentionally. As she steps forth, she takes the place of someone whom he considered expendable. She thereby passes judgment on her father's willingness to bargain for glory with the life of another. Her action condemns his priorities and perhaps those of all Israel.
Wow.
So, before we go on to this, so either, first of all, he should have known that she would come out, right? So he's guilty for making a stupid vow. It was a stupid vow anyway. and it's an unfaithful vow because he should have believed that God would help him, not that he needed to make a bargain. Then, in addition to her choosing to spend 2 months away and to have that time to mourn her death, according to this one critic, maybe she knew that he had offered her as a sacrifice or offered whatever would come out of the house, and she wanted to show him up and say, hey, you know what, that was such a stupid vow, let me show you how stupid you were. Which is a pretty giant sacrifice to prove somebody wrong. But, you know, maybe she knew about the vow. We don't know. It's a speculation. So I don't know if anybody thinks that that's a valid speculation.
Was he related to Samson?
I don't think so, but they're both...
I meant it facetiously. They're both morons.
They're both morons, exactly. They're definitely both morons, yes. So there's something also about the structure of the story that gives her some agency as well. Now you really have to see the whole thing. But anyway, so Jephtah makes a vow. He is victorious. He returns. The daughter comes out. Jephtah blames her. She accepts her fate. She requests 2 months to leave. There's lamentation. She returns. The vow is accomplished. And then there's a postscript of the custom in Israel. So you see it's a kind of chiastic structure here, except that she has the last word, pretty much. Okay. So as it begins, Jephtah is the primary actor, but his daughter subtly takes the reins by determining how the vow will be carried out. According to Phyllis Tribble, within the limits of the inevitable, she takes charge to bargain for herself. Obviously, Phyllis Tribble doesn't think she's doing this purposefully, but that somehow she has taken the agency away from him at the end of the story. The story does not end with the carrying out of the vow, but with a crucial addendum, the ritual that will preserve her memory for all time. According to Tribble, the narrative postscript shifts the focus of the story from vow to victim, from death to life, from oblivion to remembrance. And Mike Ball writes, as opposed to the cutting speech act of which Jephtah is the uncontested master, the role of daughters in the Jephtah story is to perform speech acts of memorialization. Okay. So where Jephtah's word has fatal and sacrilegious consequences, his daughter's word and that of her women friends serve to remind the reader of forgotten moral values. In a very real sense, it is not Jephtah, but his daughter who has the last word. And there she is, doing her ritual with her lady friends. So why do we have this story in the Bible? Can you guys hang on for a couple more minutes? Because I just want to finish this. Anybody object? Okay, hearing no objection, I will move on to the final couple of slides. So why is this story in the Bible? What's the function of the story? Some suggest that it's meant to point out the rash and foolish behavior of Jephtah. But his unconscionable behavior would also have been a sign of Israel's depravity, and thus an argument for instituting monarchical rule, presumably a more stable and upright form of government than what is currently in place. This message is here mediated primarily through the victimization of a woman. So that's what I was saying before, that as the book of Judges moves forward, we find more and more depravity, and the reason given is that there is no king. Okay. So, you know, that could be a reason for this. There probably are other reasons. We don't know. They didn't tell us why the rabbis included this and didn't include Judith, for example. I mean, and I do think there is the book of Judges is really making an argument for why a king is necessary. And guess who wrote most of this, or who edited most of the story? The country of Judah, because they were the last ones standing, right? Israel, the country of Israel in the north was wiped out. And Judah was the last tribe standing. And King David came from Judah. So there's probably a very strong strain in here of trying to support the kingship. Now, there are, like, we know from the end of the book of Ruth that David's origins are not so beautiful, right? On one side, he's got Lot's daughters sleeping with him, which is where the Moabites come from, and that's Ruth. And on the other side, we have the Tamar and Judah story, where Tamar is the daughter-in-law, and she sleeps with her father-in-law and has a kid who eventually becomes Boaz, right? So this is a very problematic origin story, which you can either interpret by saying, well, you know, it doesn't really matter where you're from, it's who you are, or you could say this is the strain of commentary that's trying to show David as not being such a great guy. Because really what, especially the Torah, but I'm sure the rest of the Bible as well, it's a lot of different pieces of material that are woven together, and they're different competing power interests. So when there's a book called Who Wrote the Bible? I think I've mentioned this before, by Richard Elliott Friedman. It really is Who Wrote the Torah, not Who Wrote the Bible. And basically, with the first time I read it, I was so horrified, because it talked about all these different these different priestly centers of power trying to promote their own person. One group was promoting Moses, one group was promoting Aaron, and I thought these were like divinely inspired writers. You know, what is this? They're fighting over politics and power, and I was so I mean, as cynical as I can be, I was so disheartened by it. And then I had to read it again a few years later for my class in Bible, and at that point I thought, yeah, well, you know, it's complicated, right? You can be a divinely inspired person and still be a political animal, right? So we know that even our best leaders did things that we weren't so happy about, because that's who human beings are. So I don't know, any ideas about why the story's in there? Why Judith is not in there? Why Deborah is?
That's interesting. Well, I think the Judith story is very much like the Sisera Yael story. So maybe they didn't want two of those. I think that the Jephtah story is also telling us that beware of what you say. You may make a promise to God, and you never know, you know, if you make a promise or a promise to anybody, you never know the actual consequences of what's going to happen down the line. So be careful what you say. Besides,
yeah, and vows were very important in those days, right?
Those are
I mean, you didn't sign a contract, you made a vow, and then you better stick to it. Except if you're a woman, then your husband or your father could annul your vow.
Yes, well,
I'm going to email you guys the Alicia Ostraker poem, because I think it's really, very powerful.
Very powerful. She has a whole book. Just one.
Wait, you're muted.
Sorry.
there's.
Am I unmuted?
Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to know, it occurs to me in all our discussions, because this is something I know virtually nothing about, that in order to talk about these things, you really have to understand the textual history of the Hebrew Bible.
It does help.
And I wondered if you had any books you'd recommend on that.
So what specifically are you asking for?
Well, I'm thinking of what parts were written when, by how many authors when known, what editors.
Okay, read who wrote the Bible.
Aside from that, is there?
Now that is not the most current scholarship, because it's the documentary hypothesis, in that there are 4 strains of material, and I think they believe now that there are way more than 4, but it gives you a basic idea. Then for the rest of the Bible, well, there are different authors. I mean, for example, you have the different prophets. Now, Judges is in the book of prophets, or in the section on prophets. But like Isaiah, Isaiah, they think there's 3 of them, actually 3 different periods. And Jeremiah, Ezekiel, all those other guys. And then Judges and Samuel and Kings is considered part of the Deuteronomic history. So it would be the people who kind of adhere to the Deuteronomic theology. In other words, reward and punishment for obeying or not obeying. But I don't have specifics about who wrote that stuff. And my library, most of it is at the office, so next time I go, I'll take a look. But I think also, I have everything here. The Jewish study Bible is a good one to get. That's the one I recommend when I teach Intro to Judaism, because, there are some wonderful commentaries on the Torah. Here's Gail is showing it to you, Judy. The Jewish. Okay. Jewish Study Bible. Is that Oxford? I don't have it here. Is it Oxford University Press? I think.
Yeah, mine is.
Yeah. So because there's another. I don't want you to get the wrong one. So the reason I recommend that is that there's some wonderful commentaries on the Torah. Like I love the Eitz Chaim, which is the conservative movement's commentary. But it's just the Torah. So if you want something from a Jewish perspective that has commentary on the whole Bible, that is a good one. It has notes and it has essays and all of that. So I would suggest that book, and then you can start reading the whole thing. But, there's also Robert Alter.
Yes, I have some of Robert Alter's.
I mean, he wrote The Art of Biblical Narrative, which looks at intertextual stuff. And, it's a wonderful book that I read.
The Grammar of God or something. I'm trying to remember that was grammar that was just written. Really? Yeah.
I don't know. He also has a new translation of the whole thing, but he doesn't have a lot of commentary in it. So, okay. Any final questions? Yes, Mark.
Rabbi, the Jewish Study Bible, is that by Adele Berlin? There's several.
No, that's why I was saying get the Oxford one. Okay. Yeah, Adele Berlin is a different one. You know what, Mark? I don't have your email. What is your email?
It's first name dot last name, mark.horseman@yahoo.com.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No E in Horseman.
Oh, I'm glad you told me that. Yahoo. Okay, great. So next week we are going to meet on Wednesday. I hope that's okay with everybody. I think that's the one. Okay, yeah.
Not this one, Mark.
I don't know. People are showing things. Okay.
Sorry,
bye, Regina. Let me see. What you have? Oh, there's a white. Is that Oxford?
No, this is Berlin. I wanted
No,
to
no,
just
that's
mention
not
that
the
that's the one we don't want.
No, you want the
Oh,
pink one.
that is an Oxford University Press, though. That's what I'm looking on
Yeah,
Amazon.
it looks like.
Here, it's that pink one.
Oh, yes.
I don't, I don't have. I'll send you some information about it, Mark, or I'll send it to all of you. I have it in my computer. I just don't have the book
Kind
here.
of brown, actually. It's brown.
It's brown.
Yeah, it's actually brown.
Okay, I think of it as pink. Okay, whatever. There's some pink on it.
Doesn't show an author.
I'm going to send you all the information, okay? And then we won't have to. So, yeah, next week we're going to do Wednesday because actually it's my husband's birthday on Thursday, so I thought it'd be nice to spend the evening with him. And we'll finish off the women. And then if you want to do the Akeda, I will put together something hopefully for the week after.
Okay.
And thank you all for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Good week.
Really.
Wash
Thank
your
Oh,
you.
you
hands.
have to stop recording.